Section 18 of The Fighting Edge by William MacLeod Raine. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 35. 3 in a Pit. Wounded though he was, Houk managed to make a good deal of trouble for the punchers before they pinned him down and took the .45 from him. His great strength was still at command, and he had the advantage that neither of his rescuers wanted to injure him during the struggle. They thrashed over the ground, arms and legs outflung wildly. Houk gave up only when his vigor collapsed. His surrender was complete. He lay weak and panting, bleeding from reopened wounds, for the time as helpless and submissive as a child. From a canteen they gave him water. Afterward they washed and tied up the wounds, bathed the fevered face, and kept the mosquitoes from him by fanning them away. "Expect I'd better take a pasear and see where Mr. Ute's at," Dud said. "He's liable to drop in unexpected while we're not looking. Several of him, hunting for souvenirs in the scalp line for to decorate his belt with." From the little opening he crept into the thicket of saplings and disappeared. Bob waited beside the delirious man. His nerves were keyed to a high tension. For all he knew, the bead-like eyes of 4 or 5 sharpshooters might be peering at him from the jungle. The sound of a shot startled him. It came from the direction in which Dud had gone. Had he been killed? Or wounded? Bob could not remain longer where he was. He, too, crept into the willows, following as well as he could the path of Hollister. There came to him presently the faint crackle of twigs. Someone or something was moving in the bosque. He lay still, heart thumping violently. The sound ceased, began again. Bob's trembling hand held a revolver pointed in the direction of the snapping branches. The willows moved, opened up, and a blond, curly head appeared. Bob's breath was expelled in a long sigh of relief. "Wow! I'm glad to see you. Heard that shot and thought maybe they'd got you." "Not so you can notice it," Dud replied cheerfully. "But they're all round us. I took a crack at one inquisitive buck who had notions of collecting me. He certainly hit the dust sudden as he vamoosed." "What'll we do?" "I found a kind of buffalo wallow in the willows. We'll move in on a lease and sit tight till Harshaw and the boys show up." They carried and dragged Houk through the thicket to the saucer-shaped opening Hollister had discovered. The edges of this rose somewhat above the surrounding ground. Using their spurs to dig with, the cowpunchers deepened the hollow and packed the loose dirt around the rim, in order to heighten the rampart. From a distance came the sound of heavy, rapid firing, of far, faint yells. "The boys are attacking the gulch," Dud guessed. "Sounds like they might be making a clean-up, too." It was 3 o'clock by Bob's big silver watch. Heat waves were shimmering in the hollow, and mosquitoes singing. Occasionally Hawk's voice rose in delirious excitement. Sometimes he thought the Utes were torturing him. Again he lived over scenes in the past, snatches of babble carried back to the days of his turbulent youth when all men's cattle were his. In the mutterings born of a sick brain, Bob heard presently the name of June. "Tell you I've took a fancy to you. Tell you Jake Houk gets what he wants. No sense you rearing around, June. I'm your man. Mine, girl. Don't you ever forget it. Mine for keeps. Use that gun, damn you, or crawl into a hole. I'm taking your wife from you. Speak your piece. Tell her to go with me. Ha, ha, ha." The firing came nearer. Again Dud guessed what was taking place. "They got the Utes out of the gulch and are driving them down the valley. Right soon they're liable to light on us hard. Depends on how much the boys are pressing them. They had 2 rifles and 4 revolvers, for Houk had lately become a 2-gun man. These they examined carefully to make sure they were in order. The defenders crouched back to back in the pit, each of them searching the thicket for an angle of 180 degrees. The sound of the battle died down. Evidently the pursuers were out of contact with the natives. "Don't like that," Dud said. "If the Utes have time, they'll try to pick us up as they're passing." Bob fired. "See one?" asked his friend. "Think so. Something moved, down in that hollow. He's out of sight now." "They've got us located, then. Old man Trouble headed this way. Something liable to start soon now." The minutes dragged. Bob's eyes blurred from the intensity with which he watched. A bullet struck the edge of the pit. Bob ducked involuntarily. Presently there was a second shot, and a third. "They're getting warm," Dud said. He and Bob fired at the smoke puffs, growing now more frequent. Both of them knew it would be only a short time till one of them was hit, unless their friends came to the rescue. Spurts of sand flew every few moments. There was another undesirable prospect. The Utes might charge and capture the pit, wiping out the defenders. To prevent this, the cowpunchers kept up as lively a fire as possible. From down the valley came the sound of scattered shots and yells. Dud swung his hat in glee. "Good boys! They're coming in on the rear. Hi-yi, yippee-yee!" Firing began again on the other side. The Utes were caught between the Rangers to the left and the soldiers to the right. Bob could see them breaking through the willows toward the river. It was an easy guess that their horses were bunched here and that they would be forced to cross the stream to escape. 5 minutes later Harshaw broke through the saplings to the pit. "Either you boys hurt?" he demanded anxiously. "Not a scratch on either of us," Dud reported. The boss of the Slash Lazy D wrung their hands. "By Godfrey, I'm plumb pleased. Couldn't get it out of my head that they got you lads. How's Houk?" "He's right sick. Doc had ought to look after him soon. He's had one mighty bad day of it." Houk was carried on a blanket to the river bank, where camp was being made for the night. The Utes had been routed. It was estimated that 10 or 12 of them had been killed, though the number could not be verified, as Indians always, if possible, carried away their dead. For the present, at least, no further pursuit of them was feasible. Dr. Tuckerman dressed the wounds of the Browns Park men and looked after the others who had been hurt. All told, the whites had lost 4 killed. 5 were wounded more or less seriously. The wagons had been left on the mesa 3 miles away. Houk was taken here next day on a stretcher made of a blanket tied to willow poles. The bodies of the dead were also removed. 2 days later, the Rangers reached Bear Cat. They had left the soldiers to complete the task of rounding up the Utes and taking them back to the reservation. Chapter 36. A Hero is Embarrassed. Following the Ute War, as it came to be called, there was a period of readjustment on the Rio Blanco. The whites had driven off the horses and the stock of the Indians. 2 half-grown boys appropriated a flock of several thousand sheep belonging to the Indians and took them to Glenwood Springs. On the way, they sold the sheep right and left. The asking price was $1. The selling price was 25 cents, a watermelon, a slice of pie, or a jackknife with a broken blade. The difficulties that ensued had to be settled. To get a better understanding of the situation, the governor of the state and a general of the United States Army, with their staffs, visited the White River country. While in Bear Cat, they put up at the hotel. Molly did a land office business, but she had no time to rest day or night. Passing through the office during the rush of the dinner hour, she caught sight of Blister Haynes sprawled on 2 chairs. He was talking with Bob Dilan. "Hear you done quit the /Lazy D outfit. What's the idea?" he said. "Nothing in riding," Bob told him. "A fellow had ought to get a piece of land on the river and run some cattle of his own. Me and Dud aim to do that." "Huh! And meanwhile?" "We're rip-rapping the river for old man Wilson." Blister was pleased, but he did not say so. "Takes a good man to start on a shoestring and make it go with cattle." "That's why we're going into it," Bob modestly explained. Molly broke in. "What are you boys loafing here for when I need help in the dining room? Can either of you sling hash?" The fat man derricked himself out of the chairs. "We can. Lead us to the job, ma'am." So it happened that Blister, in a white apron, presently stood before the governor ready to take orders. The table was strewn with used dishes and food, debris left there by previous diners. The amateur waiter was not sure whether the governor and his staff had eaten or were ready to eat. "Do you want a reloading outfit?" he asked. The general, seated beside the governor, had lived his life in the East. He stared at Blister in surprise, for at a council held only an hour before, this ample waiter had been the chief spokesman in behalf of fair play to the Indians. He decided that the dignified thing to do was to fail to recognize the man. Blister leaned toward the governor and whispered confidentially, "Say, Gov., take my tip and try one of these here steaks. They ain't from doggy stock." The governor had been a cattleman himself. The free and easy ways of the West did not disturb him. "Go you once, Blister," he assented. The waiter turned beaming on the officer. His fat hand rested on the braided shoulder. "How about you, Jen? Does that go double?" Upon Blister was turned the cold, hard eye of West Point. "I'll take a tenderloin steak, sir, done medium." "You'll sure find it'll stick to your ribs," Blister said cheerfully. Carrying a tray full of dishes, Bob went into the kitchen, choking down his mirth. "Blister's liable to be shot at daybreak. He's lessee majestying the U.S. Army." Chung Lung shuffled to the door and peered through. Internal mirth struggled with his habitual gravity. "Gleet smoke! Blister spilled cup coffee on General." This fortunately turned out to be an exaggeration. Blister, in earnest conversation with himself, had merely overturned a half-filled cup on the table in the course of one of his gestures. Molly retired him from service. Alone with Bob for a moment in the kitchen, June whispered to him hurriedly, "Before you and Dud go away, I want to see you a minute." "Want to see me and Dud?" he asked. She flashed a look of shy reproach at him. "No, not Dud. You." Bob stayed to help wipe the dishes. It was a job at which he had been adept in the old days when he flunkied for the telephone outfit. Afterward, he and June slipped out of the back door and walked down to the river. June had rehearsed exactly what she meant to say to him, but now that the moment had arrived, it did not seem so easy. He might mistake her friendliness. He might think there was some unexpressed motive in the back of her mind, that she was trying to hold him to the compact made in Blister Haynes's office a year ago. It would be hateful if he thought that, but she had to risk it if their comradeship was going to mean anything. When folks were friends, they helped each other, didn't they? Told each other how glad they were when any piece of good luck came. And what had come to Bob Dilan was more than good luck. It was a bit of splendid achievement that made her generous blood sing. This was all very well, But as they moved under the cottonwoods across the grass, tessellated with sunshine and shadow, the fact of sex thrust itself up and embarrassed her. She resented this, was impatient at it, yet could not escape it. Beneath the dusky eyes a wave of color crept into the dark cheeks. Though they walked in silence, Bob did not guess her discomposure. As clean of line as a boy, she carried herself resiliently. He thought her beautiful as a wildflower. The lift and tender curve of the chin, the swell of the forearms above the small brown hands that had done so much hard work so competently, filled him with a strange delight. She had emerged from the awkwardness and heaviness of the hoydenish age. It was difficult for him to identify her with the Cinderella of Piant's Creek, except by the eager flash of the eyes in those moments when her spirit seemed to be rushing toward him. They stood on the bank above the edge of the ford. June looked down into the tumbling water. Bob waited for her to speak. He had achieved a capacity for silence and had learned the strength of it. Presently June lifted her eyes to his. "Dud says you and he are going to take up preemptions and run cattle of your own," she began. "Yes, Harshaw's going to stake us. We'll divide the increase." "I'm glad. Dud ought to quit going rippity-cut every which way. No use his wasting 5 or 6 years before he gets started for himself." "No," Bob assented. "You're steadier than he is. You'll hold him down." Bob came to time loyally. "Dud's all right. You'll find him there like a rock when you need him. Best fellow in all this White River country." Her shining eyes sent a stab of pain through his heart. She was smiling at him queerly. "One of the best," she said. "Stay with you to fare you well," he went on. "If I knew a girl, if I had a sister, well, I'd sure trust her to Dud Hollister. All wool and a yard wide, that boy is." "Yes," June murmured. "Game as they make 'em. Know where he's at every turn in the road. I'd certainly back his play to a finish." "I know you would. Best old pal a fellow ever had. It's really a pity you haven't a sister," she teased. Bob guessed that June had brought him here to talk about Dud. He did, to the exclusion of all other topics. The girl listened gravely and patiently, but imps of mischief were kicking up their heels in her eyes. "You give him a good recommendation," she said at last. "How about his friend?" "Tom Reeves?" "No, Bob Dilan." Her dark eyes met his fairly. "Oh, Bob, I'm so glad." He was suddenly flooded with self-consciousness. "About us preempting?" he asked. "No. About you being the hero of the campaign." The ranger was miserably happy. He was ashamed to have the thing he had done dragged into the light, embarrassed to hear her use so casually a word that made him acutely uncomfortable. Yet he would not for the world have missed the queer little thrills that raced through him. "That's plumb foolishness," he said. "Yes, it is not. Think I haven't heard all about it? How you dragged Jake Houk into the willows right spang from among the Utes, how you went to the river and got him water, how you went for help when everybody thought you'd be killed, and how you shamed Dud into going back with you. I made Mr. Harshaw tell me all he knew, and Dud, too. He said, Mr. Harshaw said—" Bob interrupted this eager attack. "I'll tell you how it was, June. When I saw Houk lying out there with a busted leg, I didn't know who he was. Thought maybe it was Dud. So I had to go and get him. If I'd known it was Houk—" You knew it was Houk before you dragged him back, didn't you?" she charged. "You knew it when you went to the river to get him water." "Truth is, I was scared so I shook," he confessed humbly. "But when a fellow's suffering like Jake Houk was, even your enemy—" "Oh, well, enemies don't count when you're fighting Utes together. I had to look after him. Couldn't duck it. Different with Dud when he rode back to get Tom Reeves. Did you hear about that?" She put a damper on the sudden enthusiasm that lilted into his voice. "Yes, I heard about that," she said dryly. "But we're talking of another man now. You've got to stand there and take it, Bob. It won't last but a minute anyhow. I never was so tickled in my life before. When I thought of all you've suffered and gone through, and how now you've stopped the tongues of all the folks who jeered at you, I went to my room and cried like a little girl. You'll understand, won't you? I had to tell you this because we're promised to be friends. Oh, I'm so glad for you, Bob." He swallowed a lump in his throat and nodded. "Yes, I'll understand, June. It was awful nice of you to tell me. I reckon you ought to hate me the way I treated you. Most girls would." She flashed a quick look at his flaming face. His embarrassment relieved hers. "As if you knew what most girls would think," she derided. Nevertheless, she shifted the conversation to grounds less personal and dangerous. "Now you can tell me some more about that Dud you're always bragging of." Bob did not know, as he talked of his friend, that June found what he said an interpretation of Robert Dilan rather than Dudley Hollister. End of section 18. Read by Tom Penn. Section 19 of The Fighting Edge by William MacLeod Raine. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 37. A Responsible Citizen. Dilan and Hollister were lounging on the bank of Elk Creek through the heat of the day. They had been chasing a jackrabbit across the mesa for sport. Their broncos were now grazing close at hand. "Ever notice how a jackrabbit jumps high when it's crowded?" Dud asked idly. Bob nodded. "Like a deer. Crowd one and he gets to jumping high. You see that jack turn a somersault just as I threw my rope the last time?" Dud's keen eyes ranged the landscape. They were on the edge of the mesa, where it dipped down into the valley. Since he and Bob had decided to preempt a quarter section each, it had become a habit of his to study the localities over which they rode. "Country looks good round here," he suggested. "Yes," agreed his friend. "What we looking for, anyhow, Bob?" "Wood, grass, and water." "Well, they're right here, ain't they?" Bob had been thinking the same thing himself. They saddled and quartered over the ground carefully. There was a wide stretch of meadow close to the junction of Elk Creek and the river. Upon part of it a growth of young willow had sprung up, but he judged that there was nearly 150 acres of prairie. This would need no clearing. Rich wild grass already covered it luxuriously. For their first crop they could cut the native hay. Then they would sow timothy. There would be no need to plow the meadow. The seed could be disked in. Probably the land never would need plowing, for it was a soft black loam. "How about roads?" Bob asked. "The old-timers claim we'll never get roads here. Someone's going to take up all this river land mighty soon, that's a cinch, and the roads will come right soon after the settlers. Fact is, we got to jump if we're going to take up land on the river and get a choice location." "My notion, too," agreed Bob. "We'd better get a surveyor out here this week." They did. Inside of a month they had filed papers at the land office, built cabins, and move their few possessions to the claims. Their houses were made of logs, mud-chinked, with dirt floors and shake roofs instead of the usual flat dirt ones. They expected later to whipsaw lumber for the floors. A huge fireplace in one end of each cabin was used for cooking as well as for heat until such time as they could get stoves. Already they planned a garden, and in the evenings were as likely to talk of turnips, beets, peas, beans, and potatoes as of the new Hereford bulls Larson and Harshaw were importing from Denver. For the handwriting was on the wall. Cattlemen must breed up or go out of business. The old dogie would not do any longer. Already Utah stock was displacing the poor southern longhorns. Soon these too would belong to the past. Dud and Bob had vision enough to see this, and they were making plans to get a near-pedigreed bull. Dud sighed in reminiscent appreciation of the old days that were vanishing. He might have been 72 instead of 22, coming February. Behind him lay apparently all his golden youth. "We got to adapt ourselves to new ways, old Sure Shot," he ruminated aloud. "Got to quit hellin' around and raisin' Cain. Leastways, I have. You never did do any of that. Yes, sir, I got to be a responsible citizen." The partner of the responsible citizen leaned back in a reclining chair which he had made from a plank sawed into 5 parts that were nailed together at angles. "You'll be raising little towheads right soon," he said through a cloud of smoke. "No, sir, not me, not Dud Hollister. I can boss my own self for a spell yet," the fair-haired youth protested vehemently. "When I said we got to adopt ourselves, I was thinking of barbed wire fences and Timothy hay. It's all right to let the dogies rough through the winter and hunt the gulches when the storms come, but it won't do with stock that's bred up. Harshaw lost close to 40% of his cattle 3 years ago. It sure put some crimp in him. He was hit hard again last winter. You know that. Say he'd had valuable stock. Why, it would put him out of business. Sure would." "Yes," admitted Bob. "There's a schoolmarm down at Meeker was asking me about you. You know her, that snapping-eyed brunette. Wanted to know all about your claim, and was it a good one, and didn't I think Mr. Hollister a perfect gentleman, and—" Dud snatched a blanket from the bunk and smothered the redhead. They clinched, rolled on the floor, and kicked over the chair and stool. Presently they emerged from battle feeling happier. "No, we got to feed. That's a new law and the gospel of the range," Dud continued. "Got to keep our cattle under fence in winter and look after 'em right. Cattle raising is a gamble will be a losing bet right soon. It's a business now. Am I right? Sounds reasonable to me, Dud." Bob's face was grave, but he smiled inwardly. The doctrine that his friend had just been espousing was not new to him. He had urged it on Dud during many a ride and at more than one night camp, had pointed to the examples of Larson, Harshaw, and the other old-timers. Hollister was a happy-go-lucky youth. The old hard-riding cattle days suited him better, but he, too, had been forced at last to see the logic of the situation. Now, with all the ardor of a convert, he was urging his view on a partner who did not need to be convinced. Dilan knew that stock raising was entering upon a new phase, that the old loose rein system must give way to better care, attention to breeding, and close business judgment. The cattlemen who stuck to the old ways would not survive. Chapter 38. Bearcat Asleep. Bearcat basked in the mellow warmth of Indian summer. Peace brooded over the valley, a slumberous and placid drowsiness. Outside Platt and Fortner's store, big freight wagons stood close to the sidewalk. They had just come in from their long overland journey and had not yet been unloaded. A Concord stage went its dusty way down the street, headed for Newcastle. Otherwise, there was little evidence of activity. It was about 10 o'clock in the morning. The saloons and gambling houses were almost deserted. The brisk business of the night had died down. Even a poker player and a faro dealer must sleep. Main Street was in a coma. A dog lazily poked a none too inquisitive nose into its epidermis in a languid search for fleas. Past the dog went a barefoot urchin into a store for 2 pounds of 8-penny nails. 3 horsemen appeared at the end of the street and moved down it at the jog trot which is the road gait of the cowpuncher. They dismounted near the back door of Platt and Fortner's and flung the bridle reins over the wheel spokes of the big freight wagons with the high sides. They did not tie the reins, even in slip knots. The riders stood for a moment, talking in low voices before they separated. One went into Dolan's. He was a good-looking young fellow about 20. A second wandered into the hotel saloon. He was not good-looking and was twice 20. The third strolled past the bank, glanced in, turned, and walked past it a second time. He straddled, with jingling spurs, into the big store. Tom Platt nodded casually to him. "Anything I can do for you, Houk?" "I reckon," Houk grunted. Platt noticed that he limped slightly. He had no feeling of friendliness toward Houk, but common civility made him inquire how the wounded leg was doing. After the Indian campaign, the Browns Park man had gone to Meeker for his convalescence. That had been 2 months since. "'S all right," growled the big fellow. "Good. Thought you kind of favored it a little when you walked." The Browns Park man bought a plug of chewing tobacco and a shirt. "Guess the soldiers got the Utes corralled all right by this time. Hear anything new about that?" Platt asked by way of making conversation. "No," Houk replied shortly. "Got an empty gunny sack I could have?" "Sure." The storekeeper found one and a string with which to tie it. "I'll take a slab of side meat and a pound of ground coffee," the big man growled. He made other purchases: flour, cornmeal, beans, and canned tomatoes. These he put in the gunny sack, tying the open end. Out of the side door he went to the horses standing by the big freight wagons. The contents of the sack he transferred to saddlebags. Then, without any apparent doubt as to what he was going to do next, he dropped into another store, one which specialized in guns and ammunition, though it, too, sold general supplies. He bought cartridges both for the 2.45s and for the rifle he carried. These he actually tested in his weapons to make sure they fitted easily. The proprietor attempted a pleasantry. "You're kind of garnished with weapons, stranger. Not aiming to hold up the town, are you?" The amiable laugh died away. The wall-eyed stranger was looking at him in bleak silence. Not an especially timid man, the owner of the place felt a chill run down his spine. That stare carried defiance, an unvoiced threat. Later, the storekeeper made of it a stock part of his story of the day's events. "When the stranger gave me that look of his, I knew right away something was doing. Course I didn't know what. I'll not claim I did. But I was sure there'd be a job for a corner before night. Blister come into the store just after he left. I said to him, 'Who's that big black guy?' He says, 'Jake Houk.' 'Well,' I says, 'Jake Houk is sure up to some deviltry.'" It is easy to be a prophet after the event. When Houk jingled out of the store, and along the sidewalk to the hotel, none of the peaceful citizens he met guessed what he had in mind. None of them saw the signal which passed between him and the young fellow who had just come out of Dolan's. This was not a gesture. No words were spoken, but a message went from one to the other and back. The young puncher disappeared again into Dolan's. Afterward, when Bearcat began to assemble its recollections of the events prior to the dramatic climax, it was surprising how little that was authentic could be recalled. Probably a score of people noted casually the three strangers. Houk was recognized by 3 or 4, Bandy Walker by at least 1. The 6-foot youngster with them was known by nobody who saw him. It was learned later that he had never been in the town before. The accounts of how the three spent the hour between 10 and 11 are confusing. If they met during that time, it was only for a moment or two while passing, but it is certain that Bandy Walker could not have been both in the blacksmith shop and at Platt and Fortner's 5 minutes before 11. The chances are that some of the town people, anxious to have even a small part in the drama, mixed in their minds these strangers with others who had ridden in. Bob Dilan and Dud Hollister dropped from their saddles in front of the hotel at just 11 o'clock. They had ridden 30 miles and stood for a moment stretching the cramp out of their muscles. Dud spoke, nodding his head to the right. "Look what's here, Sure Shot. Your friend, Bandy, old tried and true." Walker was trailing his high-heeled boots through the dust across the street from Dolan's toward the big store. If he saw Bob, he gave no sign of knowing him. The two friends passed into the hotel. They performed their usual rites of internal and external ablutions. They returned to the bar, hooked their heels, and swapped with Mike the news of the day. "Hear Larson's bought the KT brand. Anything to it?" asked Dud. "Paid $7,000 down, time on the balance," Mike said. "How you lads making it on elk?" "Fine. We got the best preemptions on the river. Plenty of good grass, wood and water handy, a first-class summer range. It's an A1 layout, looks like." "At the end of nowhere, I reckon," Mike grinned. "The best steers are on the edge of the herd," Dud retorted cheerfully. "It's that way with ranches, too. A fellow couldn't raise much of a herd in Denver, could he?" The sound like an explosion of a distant firecracker reached him. It was followed by a second. It is strange what a difference there is between the report of one shot and another. A riotous cowpuncher bangs away into the air to stress the fact that he is alive when on the howl. Nobody pays the least attention. A bullet flies from a revolver barrel, winged with death. Men at the roulette wheel straighten up to listen. The poker game is automatically suspended, a hand half dealt. By some kind of telepathy, the players know that explosion carries deadly menace. So now the conversation died. No other sound came, but the two cattlemen and the bartender were keyed to tense alertness. They had sloughed instantly the easy indolence of casual talk. There came the slap of running footsteps on the sidewalk. A voice called in excitement, "They've killed Farrell!" The eyes of the Elk Creek ranchers met. They knew now what was taking place. Farrell was cashier of the Bearcat Bank. End of section 19. Read by Tom Penn. Section 20 of The Fighting Edge by William MacLeod Raine. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 39. Bearcat Awake. At exactly 11 o'clock, Houk, Bandy Walker, and the big young cowpuncher who had ridden into town with them met at the corner of one of the freight wagons. Houk talked, the others listened, except for a comment or two. A cattleman passing them on his way to the bank recalled afterward that the low voice of the Browns Park man was deadly serious. The two big men walked into the bank. Bandy stayed with the horses. In the building, not counting the cashier and his assistant, were 2 or 3 patrons of the institution. One was Sturgis, a round little man who had recently started a drugstore in Bearcat. He was talking to the assistant cashier. The cattleman was arranging with Farrell for a loan. The attention of the cattleman drifted from the business in hand. "Carrying a good deal of hardware, ain't they, Gus?" Farrell smiled. "Most of the boys are quitting that foolishness, but some of 'em can't get it out of their heads that they look big when they're gun-toters. Kind of a kid business, looks to me." The eyes of the cattleman rested on Houk. "I wouldn't call that big black fella a kid. Who is he?" "Don't know. Reckon we're due to find out. He's breaking away from the other fella and moving this way." Houk observed that the big cowpuncher was nervous. The hand hitched in the sagging belt was trembling. "Don't weaken, Dave," he said in a whisper out of the corner of his mouth. "We'll be out of town in 10 minutes." "Sure," agreed the other in a hoarse murmur. Houk sauntered to the cage. This was a recent importation from Denver. Bearcat was proud of it as an evidence of progress. It gave the bank quite a metropolitan air. He stood behind the cattleman, the wall at his back, so that his broad shoulders brushed it. Jake had no intention of letting anyone get in his rear. "Stick your hands up," he ordered roughly. The cattleman did not turn. His hands went up instantly. A half a second later, those of the startled cashier lifted toward the ceiling. The assistant made a bad mistake. He dived for the revolver in the desk close at hand. Houk fired. The bank clerk dropped. That shot sent panic through the heart of Sturgis. He bolted for the side door. A second shot from Houk's weapon did not stop him. A moment more, and he was on the street, racing to spread the alarm. The leader of the bank robbers swung round on Farrell. His voice was harsh, menacing. He knew that every moment now counted. From under his coat he had drawn a gunny sack. "The bank money, quick! No silver. Gold and any bills you've got." Farrell opened the safe. He stuffed into the sack both loose and packed gold. He had a few bills, not many, for in the West paper money was then used very little. "No monkey business," snarled Houk after he had stood up against the opposite wall the cattleman and the depositor who chanced to be in the bank. "This all you got? Speak up or I'll drill you." The cashier hesitated, but the ominous hollow eye into which he looked was persuasive. He opened an inner compartment lined with bags of gold. These he thrust into the gunny sack. The robber named Dave tied with shaking fingers the loose end of the sack. "Time to go," announced Houk grimly. "You're going with us, far as our horses, all of you. We ain't looking for to be bushwhacked." He lined up the bodyguard in front and on each side of himself and his accomplice. Against the back of the cattleman, he pushed the end of the revolver barrel. "Lead the way," he ordered with an oath. Houk had heard the sound of running feet along the street. He knew it was more than likely that there would be a fight before he and his men got out of town. This was not in his reckoning. The shots fired inside the bank had been outside his calculations. They had been made necessary only by the action of the teller. Jake's plan had been to do the job swiftly and silently. to get out of town before word of what had taken place reached the citizens. He had chosen Bearcat as the scene of the robbery because there was always plenty of money in the bank, because he owed its people a grudge, and because it was so far from a railroad. As he had outlined the hold-up to his fellows in crime, it had looked like a moderately safe enterprise, but he realized now that he had probably led them into a trap. Nearly every man in Bearcat was a big game hunter. This meant that they were dead shots. Houk knew that it would be a near thing if his party got away in time. A less resolute man would have dropped the whole thing after the alarm had been given and ridden away at once. But he was no quitter, so he was seeing it out. The cattleman led the procession through the side door into the street. Sunshine, warm and mellow, still bathed the street, just as it had done 10 minutes earlier. But there was a difference. Dave felt a shiver run down his spine. From the horses, Bandy barked a warning. "Hurry, Jake! For God's sake! They're all around us!" Chapter 40. Big Game Hunters at Work. Bob and his partner did not rush out of the hotel instantly to get into the fray. They did what a score of other able-bodied men of Bearcat were doing. Went in search of adequate weapons with which to oppose the bank robbers. Bearcat was probably the best equipped town in the country to meet a sudden emergency of this kind. In every house, behind the door or hanging on the wall, was a rifle used to kill big game. In every house was at least one man who knew how to handle that rifle. All he had to do was to pick up the weapon, load it, and step into the street. June was in the kitchen with Chung Lung. The Reverend Melanchthon Browning had just collected $2 from Chung for the Foreign Missionary Fund. Usually the cook was a cheerful giver, but this morning he was grumbling a little. He had been a loser at hop toy the night before. "Mr. Browning, he keep busy asking for dollars. He tell me give he to the Lord. Great smoke! Lord allee time he broke?" The girl laughed. The Oriental's quaint irreverence was of the letter and not of the spirit. Through the swing door burst Bob Dilan. "Know where there's a rifle, June?" She looked at him, big-eyed. "Not the Utes again," she gasped. "Bank robbers. I want a gun." Without a word, she turned and led him swiftly down the passage to a bedroom. In one corner of it was a .40-70 Marlin. From a peg above hung a cartridge belt. Bob loaded the gun. June's heart beat fast. "You'll be careful," she cautioned. He nodded as he ran out the door and into the alley behind. Platt and Fortner's was erecting a brick store building, the first of its kind in Bearcat. The walls were up to the second story, and the window frames were in. Through the litter of rubbish left by the workmen, Bob picked a hurried way to one of the window spaces. 2 men were crouched in another of these openings not 15 feet from him. "How many of 'em?" he asked in a loud whisper. Blister answered from the embrasure opposite. "Don't know." "Still in the bank, are they?" "Yes." Someone peered out of Dolan's through the crack of a partly open door. Bob caught the gleam of the sun upon the barrel of a gun. A hat, with a pair of eyes beneath the rim of it, showed above the sill of a window in the blacksmith shop opposite. Bearcat was all set for action. A man was standing beside some horses near the back door of Platt and Fortner's. He was partially screened from Bob's view by one of the broncos and by a freight wagon, but the young cattleman had a fleeting impression that he was Bandy Walker. Was he, too, waiting to get a shot at the bandits? Probably so. He had a rifle in his hands. but it struck Dilan he was taking chances. When the robbers came out of the bank, they would be within 30 feet of him. Out of the front door of the bank, a little group of men filed. 2 of them were armed. The others flanked them on every side. Farrell, the cashier, carried a gunny sack heavily loaded. A man stepped out upon the platform in front of Plattenfortner's. From his position, he looked down on the little bunch of men moving toward the horses. Bandy Walker, beside the horses, called on Houk to hurry, that they were being surrounded. "I got you covered. Throw down your guns," the man on the platform shouted to the outlaws, rifle at shoulder. Houk's revolver flashed into the air. He fired across the shoulder of the man whom he was using as a screen. The rifleman on the store porch sat down suddenly, his weapon clattering to the ground. "Another of 'em," Houk said aloud with a savage oath. "Anyone else looking for it?" Walker moved forward with the horses. Afraid that general firing would begin at any moment, Farrell dropped the sack and ran for the shelter of the wagons. His flight was a signal for the others, who had been marshaled out of the bank. They scattered in a rush for cover. Instantly Houk guessed what would follow. From every side, a volley of bullets would be concentrated on him and his men. He too ran, dodging back into the bank. He was not a 10th part of a second too soon. A fusillade of shots poured down. It seemed that men were firing from every door, window, and street corner. Bandy Walker fell as he started to run. 2 bullets tore through his heart, one from each side. The big cowpuncher never stirred from his tracks. He went down at the first volley. 5 wounds, any one of which would have been mortal, were later found in his body and head. All told, the firing had not lasted as long as it would take a man to run across a street. Bearcat had functioned. The bank robbers were out of business. The news spread quicker than the tongue could tell it. From all directions, men, women, and children converged toward the bank. In the excitement, the leader of the bandits was forgotten for a minute or two. "What about the third fellow?" a voice asked. The question came from Dud Hollister. He had reached the scene too late to take any part in the battle, much to his chagrin. "Went into the bank," Blister said. "I saw him duck in just before the shooting began." The building was surrounded and rushed. Houk was not inside. Evidently he had run out the back door and made for the willows by the river. A boy claimed he had seen a man running in that direction. A crowd of armed men beat the willows on both banks for a distance of a mile, both up and down the stream, wherever there was cover. No trace of the outlaw could be found. Posses on horseback took up the search. These posses not only rode up and down the river, they scoured the mesa on the other bank all day. When night fell, Houk was still at large. End of section 20. Read by Tom Penn. Section 21 of The Fighting Edge by William MacLeod Raine. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 41. In a Lady's Chamber. The drama of the hold-up and of the retribution that had fallen upon the bandits had moved as swiftly as though it had been rehearsed. There had been no wasted words, no delay in the action. But in life, the curtain does not always drop at the right moment. There was anticlimax in Bearcat after the guns had ceased to boom. In the reaction after the strain, the tongues of men and women were loosened. Relief expressed itself in chatter. Everybody had some contributing incident to tell. Into the clatter, Dud Hollister's voice cut sharply. "Someone get Doc Tuckerman, quick!" He was bending over the wounded man on the platform, trying to stop the flow of blood from a little hole in the side. Molly stepped toward him. "Carry Art into the hotel. I'll have a bed ready for him time you get there. Anybody else hurt?" "Someone said Farrell was shot." "No, he's all right. There he is over there by the wagons. See? Looking after the gold in the sack." Blister came to the door of the bank in time to hear Molly's question. "McCrae's been shot here in the bank." "Bring him in, too," ordered Molly. The wounded men were given first aid and carried into the hotel. There their wounds were dressed by the doctor. In the corridor outside, Bob and his partner met June coming out of one of the rooms where the invalids had been taken. She was carrying a towel and some bandages. "Got to get a move on me," Dud said. "I got in after the fireworks were over. Want to join Blister's posse now. You coming, Bob?" "Not now," Dillon answered. He was white to the lips. There was a fear in his mind that he might be going to disgrace himself by getting sick. The nausea had not attacked him until the shooting was over. He was much annoyed at himself. But the picture of the lusty outlaws lying in the dust with the life stricken out of them had been too much. "All right, I'll be hustling along," Dud said, and went. Bob leaned against the wall. June looked at him with wise, understanding mother eyes. "It was kind of awful, wasn't it? Gave me a turn when I saw them lying there. Must have been worse for you. Did you hit?" "No." He was humiliated at the confession. "I didn't fire a shot. Couldn't somehow. Everybody was blazing away at 'em. That's the kind of nerve I've got," he told her bitterly. In her eyes the starlight flashed. "And that's the kind I love. Oh, Bob, I wouldn't want to think you'd killed either of those poor men, and one of them just a boy." "Someone had to do it." "Yes, but not you. And they didn't have to brag afterward about it, did they? That's horrible. Everybody going around telling how they shot them, as if it was something to be proud of. I'm so glad you're not in it. Let the others have the glory if they want it." He tried to be honest about it. "That's all very well, but they were a bad lot. They didn't hesitate to kill. The town had to defend itself. No, it was just that I'm such a baby." "You're not," she protested indignantly. "I won't have you say it either." His hungry eyes could not leave her. So slim and ardent, all fire and flame. The sweetness of her energy, the grace of the delicate lifted throat curve, the warmth and color of life in her, expressed a spirit generous and fine. His heart sang within him. Out of a world of women, she was the one he wanted, the lance-straight mate his soul leaped out to meet. "There's no one like you in the world, June," he cried. "Nobody in all the world." She flashed at him eyes of alarm. A faint pink, such as flushes the sea at dawn, waved into her cheeks and throat. "I've got to go," she said hurriedly. "Molly'll be expecting me." She was off, light-footed as Daphne, the rhythm of morning in her step. All day she carried with her the treasure of his words and the look that had gone with them. Did he think it? Did he really and truly believe it? Her exaltation stayed with her while she waited on table, while she nursed the wounded men, while she helped Chung wash the dishes. It went singing with her into her little bedroom when she retired for the night. June sat down before the small glass and looked at the image she saw there. What was it he liked about her? She studied the black, crisp hair, the dark, eager eyes with the dusky shadows under them in the slight hollow beneath, the glow of red that stained the cheeks below the pigment of the complexion. She tried looking at the reflection from different angles to get various effects. It was impossible for her not to know that she was good to look at, but she had very little vanity about it. None the less, it pleased her because it pleased others. She let down her long, thick hair and combed it. The tresses still had the old tendency of her childhood to snarl unless she took good care of them. From being on her feet all day, the shoes she was wearing were uncomfortable. She slipped them off and returned to the brushing of her hair. While craning her neck for a side view, June saw in the glass that which drained the blood from her heart. Under the bed, the fingers of a hand projected into view. It was like her that in spite of the shock, she neither screamed nor ran to the door and cried for help. She went on looking at her counterfeit in the glass, thoughts racing furiously. The hand belonged to a man. She could see that now plainly, could even make out a section of the gauntlet on his wrist. Who was he? What was he doing here in her room? She turned in her chair, deliberately, steadying her voice. "Better come out from there. I see you," she said quietly. From under the bed, Jake Hawk crawled. Chapter 42. A Walk in the Park. June was the first to speak. "So you're here. You didn't get away." "I'm here," Hawk growled. "No chance for a getaway. I ran out the back door of the bank and ducked into the hotel. This was the first door I come to, and I headed in." She was not afraid of him. The power he had once held over her was gone forever. The girl had found resources within herself that refused him dominance. He was what he always had been, but she had changed. Her vision was clearer. A game and resourceful bully he might be, but she knew one quiet youth of a far finer courage. "They're looking for you along the river," she said. The muscles of his jaw hardened. "They better hope they don't find me. Some of 'em," he bragged. "So had you," she said significantly. He took her meaning instantly. The temper of Bearcat was on edge for a lynching. "Did they die, either of those fellows I shot?" the bandit demanded. "Not yet." "Fools, the pair of 'em. If that bank teller hadn't grabbed for his gun, we'd 'a' got away with it fine." She looked at him with disgust, not untouched with self-scorn because she had ever let him become an overpowering influence in her life. He could no more help boasting than he could breathing. "As it is, you've reached the end of your rope," the girl said steadily. "Don't you think I'm at the end of a rope. I'm a long ways from there." "And the men with you are gone." "How gone? Did they get 'em?" "Neither of 'em ever moved out of his tracks." "When I heard the shooting, I figured it'd be that way," Hawk said callously. She could see in him no evidence whatever of regret or remorse for what he had done. This raid, she guessed, was of his planning. He had brought the others into it, and they had paid the penalty of their folly. The responsibility for their deaths lay at his door. He was not apparently giving a thought to that. "You can't stay here," she told him coldly. "You'll have to go." "Go where? Can you get me a horse?" "I won't," June answered. "I got to have a horse, girl," he wheedled. "Can't travel without one." "I don't care how far you travel or what becomes of you. I want you out of here, that's all." "You wouldn't want me shooting up some of your friends, would you? Well, then, if they find me here, there'll be some funerals in Bearcat. You can bet heavy on that." She spoke more confidently than she felt. "They can take care of themselves. I won't have you here. I'll not protect you." The outlaw's eyes narrowed to slits. "Throw me down, would you? Tell 'em I'm here, maybe?" His face was a menace, his voice a snarl. June looked at him steadily, unafraid. "You needn't try to bully me. It's not worth wasting your time." To look at her was to know the truth of what she said, but he could not help trying to dominate the girl, both because it was his nature and because he needed so badly her help. "Sho! You're not so gosh almighty. You're just June Toliver. I'm the same Jake Houk you once promised to marry. Don't forget that, girl. I took you from that white-livered fellow you married, who saved you from the Utes when nobody else would lift a finger for you. That comes well from you, of all men," she flung out. "That ain't the point. What I'm saying is I'll not stand for you throwing me down. What can you do?" She stood before him in her stockings, the heavy black hair waving down to her hips, a slim girl whose wiry strength he could crush with one hand. Her question stopped him. What could he do if she wanted to give him up? If he made a move toward her, she would scream, and that would bring his enemies upon him. He could shoot her afterward, but that would do no good. His account was heavy enough as it stood, without piling up surplusage. "You aimin' for to sell me out?" he asked hoarsely. "No, I won't be responsible for your death." June might have added another reason, a more potent one. She knew Jake Houk, what a game and desperate villain he was. They could not capture him alive. It was not likely that he could be killed without one or two men at least being shot by him. Driven into a corner, he would fight like a wild wolf. "That's the way to talk, June. Help me out of this hole. You can if you're a mind to. Have they got patrols out everywhere?" "Only on the river side of the town. They think you escaped that way." "Well, if you'll get me a horse—" "I'll not do it." She reflected a moment, thinking out the situation. "If you can reach the foothills, you'll have a chance." He grinned wolfishly. "I'll reach 'em. You can gamble on that, if I have to drop a couple guys like I did this morning." That was just the trouble. If anyone interfered with him, or even recognized him, he would shoot instantly. He would be a deadly menace until he was out of Bearcat. "I'll go with you," June said impulsively. "Go with me?" he repeated. "Across the park. If they see me with you, nobody'll pay any attention to you. Pull your hat down over your eyes." He did as she told him. "Better leave your guns here. If anybody sees them—" "Nothing doing. My guns go right with me. What are you trying to pull off?" He shot a lowering, suspicious look at her. "Keep them under your coat, then. We don't want folks looking at us too curiously. We'll stroll along as if we were interested in our talk. When we meet anyone, if we do, you can look down at me. That'll hide your face." "You going with me clear to the edge of town?" "No, just across the square, where it's light and there's likely to be people. You'll have to look out for yourself after that. It's not more than 200 yards to the sagebrush." "I'm ready whenever you are," he said. June put on her shoes and did up her hair. She made him wait there while she scouted to make sure nobody was in the corridor outside the room. They passed out of the back door of the hotel. Chung met them. He grunted, "Good evening," with a grin at June, but he did not glance twice at her companion. The two passed across a vacant lot and into the park. They saw one or two people, a woman with a basket of eggs, a barefoot boy returning home from after-supper play. June carried the burden of the talk because she was quicker-witted than Houk. Its purpose was to deceive anybody who might happen to be looking at them. It chanced that someone was looking at them. He was a young man who had been lying on the grass stargazing. They passed close to him, and he recognized June by her walk. That was not what brought him to his feet a moment later with a gasp of amazement. He had recognized her companion, too, or he thought he had. It was not credible, of course. He must be mistaken. And yet, if that was not Jake Houk's straddling slouch, his eyes were playing tricks. The fellow limped, too, just a trifle, as he had heard the Brown Park man did from the effects of his wounds in the Ute campaign. But how could Houk be with June, strolling across the park in intimate talk with her, leaning toward her in that confidential, lover-like attitude? Jake Houk, who had robbed the bank a few hours earlier and was being hunted up and down the river by armed posses ready to shoot him like a wolf. June was a good hater. She had no use whatever for this fellow. Why then would she be with him, laughing lightly and talking with animation? Bob followed them, as noiselessly as possible, and momentarily the conviction grew in him that this was Houk. It was puzzling, but he could not escape the conclusion. There was a trick in the fellow's stride, a peculiarity of the swinging shoulders, that made for identification of the man. If he could have heard the talk between them, Bob would have better understood the situation. Ever since that memorable evening when Bearcat had driven him away in disgrace, Houk had let loose the worst impulses of his nature. He had gone bad, to use the phrase of the West. Something in him had snapped that hitherto had made him value the opinion of men. In the old days he had been a rustler and worse, but no crime had ever been proved against him. He could hold his head up, and he did. But the shock to his pride and self-esteem that night had produced in him a species of disintegration. He had drunk heavily and almost constantly. It had been during the sour temper following such a bout that he had quarreled with and shot the Ute. From that hour his declension had been swift. How far he had gone was shown by the way he had taken Dilan's great service to him. The thing rankled in his mind, filled him with surging rage whenever he thought of it. He hated the young fellow more than ever. But as he walked with June, slender, light-swinging arm with young, sensuous life, the sultry passion of the man mounted to his brain in overpowered caution. His vanity whispered to him. No woman saved a man from death unless she loved him. She might give other reasons, but that one only counted. It was easy for him to persuade himself that she had always been fond of him at heart. There had been moments when the quality of her opposition to him had taken on the color of adventure. "I'll leave you at the corner," she said. "Go back of that house and through the barbed wire fence. You'll be in the sage then." "Come with me to the fence," he whispered. "I got something to tell you." She looked at him sharply, coldly. "You've got nothing to tell me that I want to hear. I'm not doing this for you, but to save the lives of my friends. Understand that." They were for the moment in the shadow of a great cottonwood. Houk stopped, devouring her with his hungry eyes. Bad as the man was, he had the human craving of his sex. The slim grace of her, the fundamental courage, the lift of the oval chin touched a chord that went vibrating through him. He snatched her to him, crushing his kisses upon the disturbing mouth, upon the color spots that warmed her cheeks. She was too smothered to cry at first. Later, she repressed the impulse. With all her strength, she fought to push him from her. A step sounded, a cry, the sound of a smashing blow going home. Houk staggered back. He reached for a revolver. June heard herself scream. A shot rang out. The man who had rescued her crumpled up and went down. In that horrified moment, she knew he was Bob Dylan. End of section 21. Read by Tom Penn. Section 22 of The Fighting Edge by William MacLeod Raine. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 43. Not even powder burnt. Houk stood over the prostrate man, the smoking revolver in his hand, on his lips a cruel twist, and in his throat a wolfish snarl. June, watching him with eyes held in a fascination of terror, felt that at any moment he might begin pumping shots into the supine body. She shook off the palsy that held her and almost hurled her soft young body at him. "Don't!" she begged. "Don't!" Cold fingers clutched at his wrist, dragged down the barrel of the .45. "He had it coming. He was asking for it," the outlaw said. He spoke huskily, still looking down at the crumpled figure. The girl felt in him the slackness of indecision. Should he shoot again and make sure, or let the thing go as it was? In an instant he would have made up his mind. She spoke quickly, words tumbling out pell-mell. "You must hurry, hurry. When they heard that shot, listen, there's someone coming. Oh, run, run!" Her staccato warning deflected his mind from the course toward which it might have turned. He held up his head, listening. The slap of footsteps on a boardwalk could be plainly heard. A voice lifted itself in question into the night. The door of Dolan's opened and let out a fan-shaped shaft of light. The figures of men could be seen as they surged across the lit space into the darkness. June had spoken the truth. He must hurry if he was to escape. To shoot again now would be to advertise the spot where he was. He wrenched his arm from her fingers and ran. He moved as awkwardly as a bear, but he covered ground swiftly. In a few seconds the night had swallowed him. Instantly the girl was beside Dylan, on her knees, lifting his head into her arms. "Oh, Bob, Bob," she wailed. He opened his eyes. "Where did he hit you?" she cried softly. His face was puzzled. He did not yet realize what had taken place. "Hit me? Who?" "That Houk. He shot you. Oh, Bob, are you much hurt?" Dylan was recalled to a pain in his intestines. He pressed his hand against the cartridge belt. "It's here," he said weakly. He could feel the wet blood soaking through the shirt. The thought of it almost made him lose consciousness again. "Let's have a look," a squeaky voice said. June looked up. Blister had arrived, panting, on the scene. Larson was on his heels. "We better carry him to the hotel," the cattleman said to the justice. "Who did it?" "Houk," June sobbed. She was not weeping, but her breath was catching. Bob tried to rise, but firm hands held him down. "I can walk," he protested. "Let me try, anyhow." "No," insisted June. Blister knelt beside Dylan. "Where's the wound at?" he asked. The young fellow showed him. "June, you go get Doc Tuckerman," Blister ordered. She flew to obey. The fat man opened the shirt. "Look out for the blood," Bob said, still faintly. "Ouch!" Blister's hand was traveling slowly next to the flesh. "No blood here," he said. "Why, I felt it. Reckon not, son. Blister exposed his hand in the moonlight. The evidence bore out what he said. Maybe it's bleeding internally, Bob said. Larson had picked up the belt they had unstrapped from Dillon's waist. He was examining it closely. His keen eyes found a dent in the buckle. The buckle had been just above the spot where Bob complained of the pain. Maybe it ain't, Larson said. Looks like he hit your belt and the bullet went flying wild. A closer examination showed that this must be what had taken place. There was no wound on Bob's body. He had been stunned by the shock, and his active imagination had at once accepted the assumption that he had been wounded. Bob rose with a shamefaced laugh. The incident seemed to him very characteristic. He was always making a fool of himself by getting frightened when there was no need of it. One could not imagine Dud Hollister lying down and talking faintly about an internal bleeding when there was not a scratch on his body, nor fancying that he could feel blood soaking through his shirt because someone had shot at him. As the three men walked back toward the hotel, they met June and Dud. The girl cried out at sight of Bob. "I'm a false alarm," he told her bitterly. "He didn't hit me at all. Hit his belt buckle. If this here Texas man lived to be 100, he'll never have a closer call. Think of a fellow wanging away with a .45 right close to him, hitting him where he was aiming for, and not even scratching Bob. Of course, the shock of it knocked him cold. Naturally it would. But I'll go on record that our friend here was born lucky. I'd ought by rights to be holding an inquest on the remains," Blister burbled cheerfully. June said nothing. She drew a long sigh of relief and looked at Bob to make sure that they were concealing nothing from her. He met her look in a kind of dogged despair. On this one subject he was so sensitive that he found criticisms where none were intended. Blister was making excuses for him, he felt, was preparing a way of escape from his chicken-hearted weakness, and he did not want the failure palliated. "What's the use of all that explaining, Blister?" he said bluntly. "Fact is, I got scared and quit cold. Thought I was shot up when I wasn't even powder burnt." He turned on his heel and walked away. Dud's white teeth showed in his friendly, affectionate grin. Never did see such a fella for backing himself into a corner and allowing that he's a plumb quitter. I'll bet, if the facts were known, he'd come through all right. June decided to tell her story. "Yes, Dud. He must have seen Jake Houk with me, and when Jake annoyed me, Bob jumped at him and hit him. Then Jake shot." "Lucky he didn't shoot again after Bob was down," ventured Dud on a search for information. In the darkness, none of them could see the warm glow that swept across the cheeks of the girl. "I kinda got in his way and told him he'd better hurry," she explained. "Yes, but where did you meet Houk? How did he happen to be with you?" asked Larson. "To be on this side of town, he must have slipped through the guards." "He never went to the river. I found him under the bed in my room a few minutes ago. Said he ran in there after he left the bank. He wanted me to get him a horse. I wouldn't. But I knew if he was found cornered, he would kill somebody before he was taken. Maybe 2 or 3. I didn't know. And of course he wouldn't let me leave the room alone anyhow. So I said I'd walk across the park with him and let him slip into the sage. I thought it would be better." Dud nodded. "We'd better get the boys on his trail immediate. They separated with that end in view. Chapter 44. Bob holds his red head high. At the corner of the street, Bob came upon Tom Reeves and an old Leadville miner in argument. Tom made the high sign to Dillon. "What's all the rumpus about?" he wanted to know. "Jake Houk was seen crossing the park. He got into the sage." "Sho! I'll bet the whole of a doughnut he ain't been seen. If you was to ask me, I'd say he was 25 miles from here right now, and not letting no grass grow under his feet, neither. I've been talking to old Woodenhead here about the railroad coming in." Tom's eyes twinkled. His friend guessed that he was trying to get a rise out of the old-timer. "He's sure some mossback. I've been telling him the railroad's coming through here and Meeker right soon, but he can't see it. I reckon the toot of an engine would scare him most to death." "Don't get excited about that railroad, son," drawled the former hard rock driller, chewing his cud equably. "I rode a horse to death 15 years ago to beat the choo-choo train in here, and I notice it ain't a riv yet." Bob left them to their argument. He was not just now in a mood for badinage. He moved up the street past the scattered suburbs of the little frontier town. Under the cool stars he wanted to think out what had just taken place. Had he fainted from sheer fright when the gun blazed at him, or was Blister's explanation a genuine one? He had read of men being thrown down and knocked senseless by the atmospheric shock of shells exploding near them in battle, but this would not come in that class. He had been actually struck. The belt buckle had been driven against his flesh. Had this hit him with force enough actually to drive the breath out of him? Or had he thought himself wounded and collapsed because of the thought? It made a great deal of difference to him which of these was true, more than it did to the little world in which he moved. Some of the boys might guy him good-naturedly, but nobody was likely to take the matter seriously except himself. Bob had begun to learn that a man ought to be his own most severe critic. He had set out to cure himself of cowardice. He would not be easy in mind so long as he still suspected himself of showing the white feather. He leaned on a fence and looked across the silvery sage to a grove of quaking asps beyond. How long he stood there, letting thoughts drift through his mind, he did not know. A sound startled him, the faint swish of something stirring. He turned. Out of the night shadows a nymph seemed to be floating toward him. For a moment he had a sense of unreality, that the flow and rhythm of her movement were born of the imagination. But almost at once he knew that this was June in the flesh. The moonlight haloed the girl, lent her the touch of magic that transformed her from a creature not too good for human nature's daily food into an ethereal daughter of romance. Her eyes were dark pools of loveliness in a white face. "June!" he cried, excitement drumming in his blood. Why had she come to find him? What impulse or purpose had brought her out into the night in his wake? Desire of her, tender, poignant, absorbing, pricked through him like an ache. He wanted her. Soul and body reached out to her, though both found expression only in that first cry. Her mouth quivered. "Oh, Bob, you silly boy!" As if it matters why you were stunned. You were. That's enough. I'm so glad you're not hurt. It's most a miracle. He might have killed you." She did not tell him that he would have done it if she had not flung her weight on his arm and dragged the weapon down, nor How, in that dreadful moment, her wits had worked to save him from the homicidal mania of the killer. Bob's heart thumped against his ribs like a caged bird. Her dear concern was for him. It was so she construed friendship, to give herself generously without any mock modesty or prudery. She had come without thought of herself because her heart had sent her. "What matters is that when I called you came," she went on. "You weren't afraid then, were you?" "Hadn't time. That's why. Just jumped." "Yes." The expression in her soft eyes was veiled, like autumn fires in the hills blazing through mists. "You just jumped to help me. You forgot he carried 245s and would use them, didn't you?" "Yes," he admitted. "I reckon if I'd thought of that." Even as the laughter rippled from her throat, she gave a gesture of impatience. There were times when self-depreciation ceased to be a virtue. She remembered a confidence Blister had once made to her. "Texas man," she squeaked, stuttering a little in mimicry, "throw up that red head and stick out your chin." He jerked the head. Bob began to grin in spite of himself. "Whose image are you made in?" she demanded. "You know," he answered. "What have you got over all the world?" "Dominion, ma'am, but not over all of it, I reckon." "All of it," she insisted, standing clean of line and straight as a boy soldier. "Right smart of it," he compromised. "Every teeny bit of it," she flung back. "Have your own way. I know you will anyhow," he conceded. "And what are you a little lower than?" "I'm a heap lower than one angel I know." She stamped her foot. "You're no such thing. You're as good as anyone, and better." "I wouldn't say better," he murmured ironically. None the less, he was feeling quite cheerful again. He enjoyed being put through his catechism by her. "Trouble with you is you're so meek," she stormed. "You let anybody run it over you till they go too far. What's the use of crying your own goods down? Tell the world you're Bob Dilan and for it to watch your dust." "You want me to brag and strut like Jake Hawk?" "No, not like that. But Blister's right. You've got to know your worth. When you're sure of it, you don't have to tell other people about it. They know." He considered this. "That's correct," he said. "Well, then—" Bob had an inspiration. It was born out of moonshine, her urging, and the hunger of his heart. His spurs trailed across the grass. "Is my red head high enough now?" he asked, smiling. Panic touched her pulse. "Yes, Bob." "What have I got over all the world?" he quizzed. "Dominion," she said obediently in a small voice. "Over all of it? I don't know." His brown hands fastened on her shoulders. He waited till at last her eyes came up to meet his. "Every teeny bit of it." "Have your own way," she replied, trying feebly to escape an emotional climax by repeating the words he had used. "I know you will anyhow." He felt himself floating on a wave of audacious self-confidence. "Say it, then. Every teeny bit of it." "Every teeny bit of it," she whispered. "That means June Tolliver, too." The look in his eye flooded her with love. "June Dillon," the girl corrected in a voice so soft and low he scarcely made out the words. He caught her in his arms. "You precious lamb." They forgot the rest of the catechism. She nestled against his shoulder, while they told each other in voiceless ways what has been in the hearts of lovers ever since the first ones walked in Eden. End of section 22. Read by Tom Penn. Section 23 of The Fighting Edge by William MacLeod Raine. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 45. The Outlaw Gets a Bad Break. Houk crawled through the barbed wire fence and looked back into the park from which he had just fled. June was kneeling beside the man he had shot. Someone was running across the grass toward her. Soon the pursuit would be at his heels. He dared not lose a second. He plunged into the sage, making for the hills, which rose like a saw-toothed wall on the horizon. If he could reach them, he might find there a precarious safety. Some wooded pocket would give him shelter until the pursuit had swept past. He was hungry, but if he must, he could do without food for a day. The bandit was filled with a furious, impotent rage at the way fortune had tricked him. 35 miles from Bearcat, well back from the river, 3 horses were waiting for him and his dead companions in a draw. Unless somebody found them, they would wait a long time. The way that led to them was barred for him. He would have to try to reach Glenwood or Rifle. From there, he could perhaps catch a freight east or west. His one chance was to get clear out of the country. After this day's work, it would be too small to hold him. Nothing had come out as he had planned it. The farthest things from his hopes had been that he would have to fight his way out. He had not killed that fool Dilan of set purpose. He knew now that if his anger had not blazed out, he might have made his getaway and left the fellow alive. But he had been given no time to think. It was a bad break of the luck. The White River settlers would not forgive him that. They would remember that Dilan had saved him from the Indians in the Ute campaign, and they would reason, the thick-headed idiots, that the least he could have done was to let the boy go. He plunged through the sand of the sage hills at a gait that was half a run and half a walk. In his high-heeled boots, fast travel was difficult. The footgear of the cattleman is not made for walking. The hill riders do most of their travel in a saddle. Houk's feet hurt. His toes were driven forward in the boots until each step became torture. From his heels, the skin peeled from sliding up and down against the hard leather. But he dared not stop. Already he could hear the pursuers. In the still night there came to him the shout of one calling to another, the ring of a horse's hoof striking on a stone. They were combing the mesa behind him. Houk stumbled forward. Vaguely there rose before him a boulder-strewn slope that marked the limit of the valley. Up this he scrambled in a desperate hurry to reach the rocks, for the pursuit was almost upon him now. 2 outcroppings of sandstone barred the way. They leaned against each other, leaving a small cave beneath. Into this Houk crawled on hands and knees. He lay crouched there, weapon in hand, like a cornered wolf, while the riders swept up and passed. He knew one palpitating moment when he thought himself about to be discovered. 2 of the posse stopped close to his hiding place. "Must be close to him," one said. "Got the makings, Jim?" "Sure." Evidently the tobacco pouch was passed from one to the other. "Right in them rocks somewhere, I shouldn't wonder." "Mebbe so. Mebbe still hot-footin' it for the hills. He's in one hell of a hurry, if you ask me. Killed Bob Dilan in the park, I heard. If he did, he'll sure hang for it after what Dilan did for him." There came the faint sound of creaking leather as their horses moved up the hill. The outlaw waited till they were out of hearing before he crept into the open. Across the face of the slope he cut obliquely, working always toward higher ground. His lips were drawn back so that the tobacco-stained teeth showed in a snarl of savage rage. It would go ill with any of the posse if they should stumble on him. He would have no more mercy than a hunted wild beast. With every minute now his chances of safety increased. The riders were far above him and to the left. With luck he should reach Piant's Creek by morning. He would travel up till he came to Pete Tolliver's place. He would make the old man give him a horse. Not since the night he had been ridden out of Bearcat on a rail had he seen the nester, but Pete always had been putty in his hands. It would be easy enough to bully him into letting him have whatever he wanted. All he needed was a saddled mount and provisions. Houk was on unfamiliar ground. If there were settlers in these hills, he did not know where they were. Across the divide, somewhere, ran Piant's Creek, but, except in a vague way, he was not sure of the direction it took. It was possible he might lay hold of a horse this side of Tolliver's. If so, he would not for a moment hesitate to take it. All night he traveled. Once he thought he heard a distant dog, but, though he moved in the direction from which the barking had come, he did not find any ranch. The first faint glimmer of gray dawn had begun to lighten the sky when he reached the watershed of Piant's. It had been 17 hours since he had tasted water, and that had been as a chaser after a large drink of whiskey. He was thirsty, and he hastened his pace to reach the creek. Moving down the slope, he pulled up abruptly. He had run into a cavvy grazing on the hill. A thick growth of pine and pinyon ran up to the ridge above. Back of a scrub evergreen, Houk dropped to consider a plan of action. He meant to get one of these horses, and to do this he must have it and be gone before dawn. This was probably some roundup. If he could drift around close to the camp and find a saddle, there would likely be a rope attached to it. He might, of course, be seen, but he would have to take a chance on that. Chance befriended him to his undoing. As he crept through the brush, something caught his ankle, and he stumbled. His groping fingers found a rope. One end of the rope was attached to a stake driven into the ground. The other led to a horse, a pinto, built for spirit and for speed. His trained eye could tell. He pulled up the stake and wound up the rope, moving toward the pinto as he did so. He decided it would be better not to try to get a saddle till he reached Tolliver's place. The rope would do for a bridle at a pinch. The horse backed away from him, frightened at the stranger who had appeared from nowhere. He followed, trying in a whisper to soothe the animal. It backed into a small pinyon, snapping dry branches with its weight. Houk cursed softly. He did not want to arouse anybody in the camp or to call the attention of the night jinglers to his presence. He tried to lead the pinto away, but it balked and dug its forefeet into the ground, leaning back on the rope. The outlaw murmured encouragement to the horse. Reluctantly, it yielded to the steady pull on its neck. Man and beast began to move back up the hill. As soon as he was a safe distance from the camp, Houk meant to make of the rope a bridle. In the pre-dawn darkness he could see little, and that only as vague outlines rather than definite shapes. But some instinct warned the hunted man that this was no roundup camp. He did not quite know what it was, yet he felt as though he were on the verge of a discovery, as though an unknown but terrible danger surrounded him. Unimaginative he was, but something that was almost panic flooded up in him. He could not wait to mount the horse until he had reached the brow of the hill. Drawing the rope close, he caught at the mane of the horse and bent his knees for the spring. Houk had an instant's warning, and his revolver was half out of its scabbard when the rush of the attack flung him against the startled animal. He fought like a baited bear, exerting all his great strength to fling back the figures that surged up at him out of the darkness. From all sides they came at him, with guttural throat cries, swarming over each other as he beat them down. The struggling man quartered over the ground like some unwieldy prehistoric reptile. Houk knew that if he lost his footing, he was done for. Once, as the cluster of fighters swung downhill, the outlaw found himself close to the edge of the group. He got his arms free and tried to beat off those clinging to him. Out of the melee he staggered, a pair of arms locked tightly around his thighs. Before he could free himself, another body flung itself at his shoulder and hurled him from his feet. His foes piled on him as ants do on a captured insect. His arms were tied behind him with rawhide thongs, his feet fastened together rather loosely. He was pulled to a sitting position. In the east the sky had lightened with the promise of the coming day. His clothes torn from his arms and body, his face bleeding from random blows, Houk looked around on the circle of his captors defiantly. In his glaring eyes and close-clamped, salient jaw, no evidence was written of the despair that swept over him in a wave and drowned hope. He had in this bleak hour of reckoning the virtue of indomitable gameness. "All right, you got me. Go to it, you red devils," he growled. The Utes gloated over him in a silence more deadly than any verbal threats. Their enemy had been delivered into their hands. Chapter 46. The End of a Crooked Trail. In the grim faces of the Utes, Houk read his doom. He had not the least doubt of it. His trail ended here. The terror in his heart rose less out of the fact itself than the circumstances which surrounded it. The gray dawn, the grim copper-colored faces, the unknown torment waiting for him, stimulated his imagination. He could have faced his own kind, the cattlemen of the Rio Blanco, without this clutching horror that gripped him. They would have done what they thought necessary, but without any unnecessary cruelty. What the Utes would do, he did not know. They would make sure of their vengeance, but they would not be merciful about it. He repressed a shudder and showed his yellow teeth in a grin of defiance. "I reckon you're right glad to see me," he jeered. Still they said nothing, only looked at their captive with an aspect that daunted him. "Not dumb, are you? Speak up, some of you," Houk snarled, fighting down the panic within him. A wrinkled old Ute spoke quietly. "Man with loud tongue die. He kill Indian. Give him no chance. Indians kill him now." Houk nodded his head. "Sure, I killed him. He'd stolen my horse, hadn't he?" The old fellow touched his chest. "Black Arrow my son. You kill him. He take your horse, maybe. You take Ute horse." He pointed to the pinto. "Ute kill man with loud tongue." "Black Arrow reached for his gun. I had to shoot. It was an even break." Houk's voice pleaded in spite of his resolution not to weaken. The spokesman for the Indians still showed an impassive face, but his voice was scornful. "Is man with loud tongue a yellow coyote? Does he carry the heart of a squaw? Will he cry like a papoose?" Houk's salient jaw jutted out. The man was a mass of vanity. Moreover, he was game. "Who told you I was yellow? Where did you get that? I ain't scared of all the damn Utes that ever came out of hell." And to prove it, perhaps, too, by way of bolstering his courage, he cursed the redskins with a string of blistering oaths till he was out of breath. The captive needed no explanation of the situation. He knew that the soldiers had failed to round up and drive back to the reservation a band of Utes that had split from the main body and taken to the hills. By some unlucky chance or evil fate, he had come straight from Bearcat to their night camp. The Utes left Houk pegged out to the ground, while they sat at a little distance and held a powwow. The outlaw knew they were deciding his fate. He knew them better than to expect anything less than death. What shook his nerve was the uncertainty as to the form it would take. Like all frontiersmen, he had heard horrible stories of Apache torture. In general, the Utes did not do much of that sort of thing, but they had a special grudge against him. What he had done to one of them had been at least a contributory cause of the outbreak that had resulted so disastrously for them. He would have to pay the debt he owed. But how? He sweated blood while the Indians squatted before the fire and came to a decision. The council did not last long. When it broke up, Houk braced his will to face what he must. It would not be long now. Soon he would know the worst. Two of the braves went up the hill toward the cavvy. The rest came back to their captive. They stood beside him in silence. Houk scowled at them, still defiant. "Well?" he demanded. The Utes said nothing. They stood there, stolid. Their victim read in their voiceless condemnation an awful menace. "Unload it," he jeered. "I'm no squaw. Shoot it at me. Jake Houk ain't scared." Still they waited. The father of Black Arrow, with folded arms, a sultry fire burning in his dark eyes. The two men who had gone to the cavvy returned. They were leading a horse with a rope around his neck. Houk recognized the animal with a thrill of superstitious terror. It was the one about the possession of which he had shot Black Arrow. The old chief spoke again. "Man with loud tongue claimed this horse. Utes give it him. Horse his. Man with loud tongue satisfied then, maybe." "What are you aiming to do, you red devils?" Houk shouted. Already he guessed vaguely at the truth. Men were arranging a kind of harness of rope and rawhide on the animal. Others stooped to drag the captive forward. He set his teeth to keep back the shriek of terror that rose to his throat. He knew now what form the vengeance of the savages was to take. End of section 23. Read by Tom Penn. Section 24 of The Fighting Edge by William MacLeod Raine. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 47. The Kingdom of Joy. A prince of the Kingdom of Joy rode the Peon's trail on a morning glad with the song of birds and the rippling of brooks. Knee to knee with him rode his princess, slim and straight, the pink in her soft, smooth cheeks, a shy and eager light in the velvet dark eyes. They were starting together on the long, long trail, and the poor young things could vision it only as strewn with sun-bathed columbines and goldenrods. The princess was a bride, had been one for all of 12 hours. It was her present conviction that she lived in a world wonderful, and that the most amazing radiant thing in it was what had happened to her and Bob Dilan. She pitied everyone else in the universe. They were so blind. They looked, but they did not see what was so clear to eyes from which the veil had been stripped. They went about their humdrum way without emotion. Their hearts did not sing exultant paeans that throbbed out of them like joy notes from a meadowlark's throat. Only those who had come happily to love's fruition understood the meaning of life. June was not only happy, she was this morning wise, heiress of that sure wisdom which comes only to the young when they discover just why they have been born into the world. How many joys there were for those attuned to receive them! Her fingers laced with Bob's, and from the contact a warm, ecstatic glow flooded both their bodies. She looked at his clean brown face, with its line of golden down above where the razor had traveled, with its tousled reddish hair falling into the smiling eyes, and a queer little lump surged into the girl's throat. Her husband! This boy was the mate heaven had sent her to repay for years of unhappiness. My wife! It was all still so new and unbelievable that Bob's voice shook a little. "Are you sorry?" she asked. Her shy smile teased. She did not ask because she needed information, but because she could not hear too often the answer. "You know whether I am. Oh, June girl, I didn't know it would be like this," he cried. "Nor I, Bob." Their lithe bodies leaned from the saddles. They held each other close while their lips met. They were on their way to Pete Tolliver's to tell him the great news. Soon now the old cabin and its outbuildings would break into view. They had only to climb 12-Mile Hill. Out of a draw to the right a horse moved. Through the brush something dragged behind it. "What's that?" asked June. "Don't know. Looks kind of queer. It's got some sort of harness on." They rode to the draw. June gave a small cry of distress. "Oh, Bob, it's a man!" He dismounted. The horse with the dragging load backed away, but it was too tired to show much energy. Bob moved forward, soothing the animal with gentle sounds. He went slowly, with no sudden gestures. Presently he was patting the neck of the horse. With his hunting knife he cut the rawhide thongs that served as a harness. "It's a Ute pony," he said, after he had looked it over carefully. He knew this because the Indians earmarked their mounts. June was still in the saddle. Some instinct warned her not to look too closely at the load behind that was so horribly twisted. "Better go back to the road, June," her husband advised. "It's too late to do anything for this poor fellow." She did as he said, without another look at the broken body. When she had gone, Bob went close and turned over the huddled figure. Torn though it was, he recognized the face of Jake Houk. To construct the main features of the tragedy was not difficult. While escaping from Bearcat after the fiasco of the bank robbery, Houk must have stumbled somehow into the hands of the Ute band still at large. They had passed judgment on him and executed it. No doubt the wretched man had been tied at the heels of a horse which had been lashed into a frenzied gallop by the Indians in its rear. He had been dragged or kicked to death by the frightened horse. As Bob looked down into the still, disfigured face, there came to him vividly a sense of the weakness and frailty of human nature. Not long since this bit of lifeless clay had straddled his world like a colossus. To the young cowpuncher he had been a superman. terrible in his power and capacity to do harm. Now all that vanity and egoism had vanished, blown away as though it had never been. Where was Jake Houk? What had become of him? The shell that had been his was here, but where was the roaring bully that had shaken his fist blasphemously at God and man? It came to him, with a queer tug at the heartstrings, that Houk had once been a dimpled baby in a mother's arms, a chirping little fat-legged fellow who tottered across the floor to her with outstretched fingers. Had that innocent child disappeared forever? Or in that other world, to which Jake had so violently gone, would he meet again that better self his evil life had smothered? Bob loosened the bandana from his throat, and with it covered the face of the outlaw. He straightened the body and folded the hands across the breast. It was not in his power to obliterate from the face the look of ghastly, rigid terror stamped on it during the last terrible moments. The young husband went back to his waiting wife. He stood by her stirrup while she looked down at him, white-faced. "Who was it?" she whispered. "Jake Houk," he told her gravely. "The Utes did it, because he killed Black Arrow, I reckon." She shuddered. A cloud had come over the beautiful world. "We'll go on now," he said gently. "I'll come back later with your father." They rode in silence up the long hill. At the top of it he drew rein and smiled at his bride. "You'll not let that spoil the day, will you, June? He had it coming, you know. Houk had gone bad. If it hadn't been for the Utes, it would have been the law a little later." "Yes, but—" She tried to answer his smile, not very successfully. "It's rather awful, isn't it?" He nodded. "Let's walk over to the cabin, dear." She swung down into his arms. There she found comfort that dissipated the cloud from her mind. When she ran into the house to throw her arms around Pete Tolliver's neck, she was again radiant. "Guess what?" she ordered her father. Pete looked at his daughter and at the bashful, smiling boy. "I reckon I done guessed, honey bug," he answered, stroking her rebellious hair. "You're to come and live with us, isn't he, Bob?" The young husband nodded sheepishly. He felt that it was a brutal thing to take a daughter from her father. It had not occurred to him before, but old Pete would feel rather out of it now. Tolliver looked at Bob over the shoulder of his daughter. "You be good to her, or I'll—" His voice broke. "I sure will," the husband promised. June laughed. "He's the one ought to worry, Dad. I'm the flyaway on this team." Bob looked at her, gifts in his eyes. "I'm worrying a heap," he said, smiling. The end. End of section 24. Read by Tom Penn. End of The Fighting Edge by William MacLeod Raine.